I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Welcome back to another episode of the Time for Teachership podcast. This is episode 272, and today we're talking about assessing discourse. Woo! Such a good topic. Often we talk about assessments, and often we think about the types of grading of essays and all the things. I mean, I was a former high school literacy teacher, so there's a lot of written work that we think of. But we can, and I would argue should, be assessing discourse as well. Whether that is verbal, whether that is ASL, whatever the communication style is, that is going to be really critical to assess. It's something that is not in writing, right? So here are some of the challenges. Yes, it is easier to assess students' written work sometimes for a variety of reasons, often because of the things that we are looking for and trying to assess, but also because often it is hard when you are focused on facilitating and teaching, and often discourse is mediated by the teacher and we don't have as much student-led conversation. When you're trying to do all of that, it is very challenging to pay attention to what the students are saying and do any sort of grading or assessment. Okay, so here are the kind of categories of things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you actually collect the data so that you don't have to do everything in the moment, though you can, but there are ways to kind of collect the data to return to it later, both for your evaluative purposes or assessment purposes and feedback purposes, but also for students to reflect on their own participation, both individually and as a class. We'll also talk about what you can assess. So what are you actually trying to pay attention to and notice and give feedback on? That's going to be kind of the bulk of the episode, I think. And then we're going to talk about leveraging self and peer reflection, as I mentioned, and we'll end with a few tips and a freebie. Okay, let's start with collecting the data. One option, and this is a great one if you can, take a transcript. Certainly you can use some AI-based services to transcribe audio for you. I mean, Loom does it. If you have a certain package, Zoom does it. I want to say Google Meets might even do it. So you certainly can take an audio recording and then transcribe it using a specific service. But I also think that it is something that you can have a rough transcript, your role, if you set it up so that the students are truly leading the discussion and you're just kind of typing, you can do that. The best way, if you have this as an opportunity, the best way I suggest is actually to use either co-teachers if you have them, coaches, instructional coaches, or other people who are kind of visiting your class. Say, oh, you want to visit my class? Great. Visit my class and I need you to do something for me, right? Can you take a transcript of this whole class discussion? Or we're having small group discussions. Can you please sit in with this group and take a transcript of this group, right? You can also rotate if you're doing constant small group discussions. You can take a transcript. Let's say you do one every day. You can take a transcript. Let's say there's 5 groups of one group on Monday, one group on Tuesday, so on, so on. You can also have, and I've done this before, when there are small groups, have groups set up a recording, you'll give them a computer, an iPad or something, and say, okay, well, you're going to record yourselves on video or audio, whatever the parameters for your permissions are at the school. But that way you can also just get a sense of okay, everyone's recording and I'm going to be able to listen to it even though there's 5 conversations happening at the same time. So let's talk about what you can assess during a student-led conversation. So I just read Maria Nichols' book from 2019, Building Bigger Ideas. It is great. It is excellent. I think it is written for elementary, but it is totally valuable for all grades. And I'm going to share kind of a slightly adapted version with some added thoughts of my own from her list of what she considers when she is assessing discourse. Okay, number 1, the use of or range of is the language she used. Range of talk behaviors and if they're purposeful. So talk behaviors in my mind are things like asking questions, clarifying questions, or like prompting discussion. So we have a Socratic seminar and there's, yes, a key question, but I'm going to add my own question. I want to see how my peers respond. Could be synthesizing. So here are the points of agreement that I'm noticing in our class. Is the one place that we disagree, right? We disagree on this particular thing. Can we go down this path? Identifying points of confusion. Like, okay, so we're kind of talking about this in two different ways. It's not necessarily disagreement, but we seem confused. Can we go there? Building on others' ideas is definitely a talk behavior that is purposeful. We want to grow our ideas. And we don't want to just use the sentence frame. I'd like to add on to so-and-so because blah, 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 right? But we actually want to deepen the ideas, complicate the ideas, stretch the ideas. So building on in a purposeful way. We might also use a talk behavior like inviting new ideas or people into the conversation if they have been quiet. We might just invite to anyone. Maybe it's not a specific person, but we might say to the group, is there anyone who thinks differently about this? Like, let's get a different idea in here. Those are all great talk moves that we can link to purpose. Okay, the other thing Maria Nichols talks about is individual and collective patterns of participation. So yes, this might be something like how much one person talks. Spider webbing is a good, like a mapping for that. So you would literally, let's say you're all in a circle, you would draw kind of a circle on the page, label where everyone is sitting, and then you would draw a line from one person to the next person who talks to the next person who talks. What this does is it illuminates kind of the pattern of who talks after whom. Is there a particular dynamic where people are talking back and forth and the rest of the class is kind of silent? Overall, how many lines does a kid have, at the end of the discussion versus like, oh, that student never got a line, they never once spoke, right? It kind of illuminates things like that. So frequency, pattern of talk, and also kind of like order of who usually goes first. Also other things to think about when we think about individual and collective patterns of participation. This may not be what Maria Nichols was thinking, but I think about body language and facial expressions and kind of how the group may, not using verbal language necessarily, but how they demonstrate their engagement, lack of engagement, other emotions and thoughts that come up in various ways. So that might be something you notice. She also talks about strengths of the community regarding discourse. So I would think of the co-created discourse agreements that hopefully you came up with as a class prior to having the conversation. So how well do we adhere to these things? And I think that's a really important thing. I'll get to this later, but to note and have the class think about as a group after the conversation as well. But that is something you can note while the conversation is happening. Strengths of meaning making, she's talking about. I think this is really like deepening the thinking here. So are we deepening the thinking? Are we just kind of abandoning ideas? I have had the great fortune to collaborate and coach an amazing ELA teacher. His name is Gabe Weaver, and he has used reflective prompts surrounding transcripts. I'll mention one in a moment, but any sort of like student-led discourse. And he has invited students to look at a transcript and think about where do we kind of like abandon an idea and where could we actually tap back into that and take that into a new place or to go deeper? Like, let's reevaluate if we could have this conversation again. Where do we miss an opportunity to deepen the thinking? Which I think is a really great reflective prompt for students. The other thing Maria Nichols thinks about is how much facilitation is needed. So is this truly student-led? Or was the teacher just kind of like in between each student voice? Is she really, or he really, or they really directing the conversation? Or are they good to go, right? Are they talking to one another, looking at one another? Okay. Other things, and this is how I initially started. This might be kind of your go-to right now, but I do think there's value in this, so continue the practice. Key ideas or quotes from the discussion are great things to notice. Also, this gives you an opportunity to kind of synthesize at the end. If you want to give a synthesis, just in case your students don't, ideally it's student-led, the synthesizing. But if you're going to do it at first and then turn it over to them later, it's great to model. We know this about discourse. Actually, the research bears this out, that modeling, even for like a week's worth of discussions, like model 6 or 7 times even, when you turn it over to students, they are doing things so markedly better. Really helpful to model. Anyways, you can identify things that are important to hold on to, so those key ideas, but you could also say, hey, this is questionably factual. We're going to do a fact checkers. class tomorrow, or at least like 10 minutes of the class, we're each going to investigate one of these claims. If it is a blatant inaccuracy, you can absolutely jump in and correct in the moment. I know I say teachers don't talk during student-led discourse, but you can absolutely correct blatant inaccuracies if a student does not. But ones that are like, I'm not sure about this, or as a class, it would be beneficial for us to investigate, hang on to those and repeat those later. Okay, other things you can think about or notice or reflect on: subject-specific, skill-based standards. So for social studies, this is often claim, evidence, reasoning. For science or math, it might be analyzing a graph of data. Like if they're using a visual support and analyzing that, or pulling in information from diverse sources, all of that is really great. And those are skill-based standards that are maybe specific to your subject area. You can totally look for those. We also can assess like how students seem to be understanding the content. We can also, thinking about our last episode from last week on the WIDA framework, we can think about, for multilingual learners or any students really, the language use. So, thinking again about the key language use. So are we doing like an argument? Okay, well then what are the language expectations, functions, and features of argumentative language, right? And we can think about that 6-point rubric that WIDA has to support language building and development. We can also, I just also want to name, and I don't think I said this in the WIDA episode, there is a speaking rubric for grades 1 through 12 that has kind of general indicators for the discourse level. So like the linguistic complexity of the student. Sentence level, so those are like the language forms, and the word phrase level, which would be like their vocabulary usage. So that is really helpful. And they also have a really good chart on page 20 of the framework. So again, go back to that episode to get the link, of asking teachers after you have listened to students have discourse, what can students do? What are your next teaching and learning moves? And then what are strategies to support and scaffold learning? So, I think any teacher can do that for any student, but I think that's a really helpful piece to just know exists. Okay, and then I have mentioned this a lot already, but leveraging self and peer reflection is really critical here, particularly because I think about the ways that we interact with our peers, and students interact with their peers in non-classroom environments that are really truly student-led or youth-led, because they are not in a class environment at all. They're just like, we want to be able to facilitate students to have good conversations with their peers and with other people beyond the classroom. And so it is really important that students feel they have the capacity and language to share what went well, what didn't go well, how to have these conversations, but also reflect on them. So what does that look like in a class setting? For an exit ticket post-discussion, I like an individual reflection. So have students kind of assess their discourse skills. You can give them a rubric if you have one. Have them note specific strengths and areas for growth. I like to have them give examples. Like if you tell me you're really good at using evidence, well, how did you do that today? If you tell me that you're really good at synthesizing, write me a synthesis. If you didn't do it verbally, at least, like show me that you can do that skill. I also really like the question, hearkening back to Maria Nichols' idea of deepening thinking. James Nottingham writes about growing the thinking. How did your thinking change? Because if it didn't, we need to do something differently, right? But also, how did it feel experientially? Like, did you feel like you were an equitable participant in the conversation? Did you feel that the class valued what you had to say? Did it feel good to listen and seek to understand? Right? Like, how did it viscerally feel in your body? We can also have each individual, and collectively we can talk as a group or in a small group about the class as a whole, or whatever the group size was for your discourse. And you could assess the group's discourse skills. Again, same thing, note strengths, note areas for growth, give examples, but also do an agreement check-in. So we have these agreements. Did we follow them? Did we find that there was a moment where we actually needed to either adhere to something better, or do we need to revise or introduce a new discourse agreement that is not currently in our list, but this specific interaction highlighted the need to add or edit? That's also very possible, right? The agreements should really evolve and grow with the class and with the experiences we have together.
Hi, this is Leah coming in to share the free resource for this episode, Discussion Resource Bank. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/272. Now back to the show.
Again, I mentioned Gabe Weaver's awesome transcript analysis practice. I'm actually going to link, he said that was okay to share with teachers. It's so great. He has so many of these, but I'm going to link one example of his transcript analysis. And in that, he actually says, it was him doing this. You can also have students. Ultimately, we want students to be doing this. But where there is an interjection from the teacher or a student move that is great, you want to highlight for them that happened in a transcript and invite them, okay, check out the highlighted sections. Pick a highlighted section and tell me, what was this person doing and why did they do it? So basically, again, thinking about Maria Nichols, identifying the range of talk moves and their connection to a purpose. What was this doing? What was the talk move? And why did they do it? What was the purpose? How did this grow the thinking? How did this, whatever the goal was? I think it would be incredibly powerful to have a transcript, share it with students, and invite reflection. And this is one question you can ask them in reflection. You could ask them many more. Gabe certainly has experimented with asking different ones throughout the years of him doing this. But I think the goal is students are not just done with the conversation. They're looking back on the conversation and they are reflecting on like how to grow it next time and how it could be better. Okay, some final tips. I mentioned some of these kind of throughout the episode, but just want to wrap up with, when you are having student-led discourse, they often will look at you if this is new to them. Even if you are sitting behind students, which I recommend, let them sit and look at each other. Encourage them to face each other and not turn and look at you and talk to you. They're talking to each other. That is a big shift. It will happen over time, but do what you can to facilitate that. And if students actually like pull you into the conversation, if they ask you questions, often this happens, I find, in a small group setting. So like a table talk, like a 4 or 5 students, and you just kind of go to listen in or pay attention to what they're doing. What you can do in response is to pose a question in return. So what do you think is like my favorite? That's a super easy one to just have in your back pocket, right? Oh, miss, whatever. What do you think? Right? Usually works in most situations. Or you might, if they're really stuck on something, you might cue them because they have a particular resource that could help them. Be like, oh, that makes me think of your whatever worksheet, or that makes me think of this poster on the wall. Whatever it is, you can do a light cue or just pose a question in return. Like, you don't have to completely ignore them, but I wouldn't engage and try to like jump in and help if unnecessary. Let them try to grapple with it. And they're in a group, like they can lean on each other. If the question doesn't work for the kid asking it, maybe one of the other kids will pick up. Okay, that is it for this episode. You can grab all of this information, the various links that I talked about, in the freebie for this episode, which is a skill-based rubric template for assessment, in our blog post, which is located at www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/272. If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. And they say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan, from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.